let's talk about Oklahoma and Texas, but not in 2023, in 2024, because last week, the SEC decided to unveil its 2024 schedules for all 16 of its members come the 2024 season. As it is summer, as we are gearing up for college football, this feels like the perfect time for the SEC to tell us who's going to play with who, where they're going to play, and for them to kind of counter program against the Big Ten, who did that the week earlier, and we talked about it here on the show. But in a kind of twist, we're going to talk about Oklahoma and Texas in particular because, well, I'm an Oklahoma guy. You know this very well. And by being an Oklahoma guy, I also kind of am very interested in what Texas is doing, but for an entirely different reason, right? We want to know, does Texas have a better draw than Oklahoma? Maybe. We also want to see just where we are expected to see these games and what this means in 2024. So let's start with this, right? The SEC ensured that all 14 of its members pick up a shift against Oklahoma or Texas, which also means that we're taking trips to and from all of these venues if you're Oklahoma and Texas over the next 2 years, because they're going to finish their final season in the 2023 season in Big 12 country. And then we got our traditional rivalries that you take care of. OU, Texas, Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee. I'm sure Tennessee fans are very excited about that. Texas A&M remains, with these popular matchups that, they end up getting like Arkansas and South Carolina. I'm joking about South Carolina. Going to be a lot of jokes about South Carolina today. Alabama, LSU is intact. Texas, Arkansas is intact. Florida, Tennessee is intact. LSU, Florida is intact. Georgia, Tennessee is intact. And LSU, Ole Miss is intact. Now, where I think this gets interesting is, as you know, the Big Ten chose to go with what it calls the Flex Protect Plus program, which feels like the kind of thing that Billy Mays might sell me late at night in an infomercial. And the SEC decided, we're going to stick with an 8-game schedule. We're going to stick with an 8-game schedule, and we're going to tell everybody that they have to play at least one Power 5 school outside of conference, but they can keep their FCS opponents. Now, what this means for SEC scheduling purposes is that you get just one permanent opponent, and you rotate through the other 15, which means you get to play everybody, but you only got that one regular opponent that you're going to see each and every year. Now, eventually Oklahoma and Texas will receive the same prestige, that comes with being a blue blood in the SEC. But right now, it feels like Oklahoma got the short stick and Texas got the good stick. Now, I also am going to take this time to just mention right off the top that the highest revenue generating college athletic departments 2022 is out, right? According to 247, we're talking about Ohio State at number 1, then Texas at 2, then Alabama at 3, Michigan at 4, Georgia at 5. Okay? So that's 4 teams that have played in the college football playoff in the last college football playoff era, right? And we're talking about Texas. And then you go down the list, it's LSU, it's A&M, it's Gators in Florida, it's Oklahoma. That's your top 10, right? Penn State is the only other program inside the top 10, which means you're moving into the rich neighborhood if you're Oklahoma and Texas. And wins are not going to be cheap, which is how we're going to start talking about Oklahoma's schedule. Okay? Wins are not going to be cheap. I've been saying this since they announced that they were departing the Big 12 to leave to the SEC 2 years ago, saying, hey, guys, I like winning 10, 11, 12 games a season. It's nice. I like renting a room both in the Big 12 championship and in the college football playoff. It's nice. To which most Oklahoma fans were like, well, if we're in the SEC, we have a better chance of making the playoff. Not necessarily, because you're adding 2 more to that 14-team league that's already pretty damn stout. Ask Tennessee about making the college football playoff. After beating Bama, I might add, right? Putting together that Orange Bowl level season where they beat Clemson in the Orange Bowl with Joe Milton. But let's start with positive here. Oklahoma and Texas is still going to get played in Dallas, right? And as I'm ranking these matchups on the schedule, that's still number 1 for me. OU Texas is always going to be number 1 and the one that I look forward to the most. Now, what I think is most interesting about this Oklahoma schedule isn't necessarily that they're going to keep playing Texas. It isn't even that they're going to play Tennessee at home, which, well, we're here now. I'm excited about that game. I'm excited about that game because it means they get another chance to bloody the sport's loudest orange. I love that so much. Those colors clash so well. It's brilliant. But this time it's likely to be, well, one of their own running the Volunteers, right? In Josh Heupel, Oklahoma's own, right? And then he's going up against Brent Venables. Now, I might also add, Josh Heupel has had a pretty damn good career so far, right? We're talking about a guy that beat Nick Saban at Oklahoma with Trevor Knight at quarterback. I don't know of anybody else that could have done that. And we're also talking about a man that beat Nick Saban as head coach of Tennessee and would like nothing more than to walk into his old stomping grounds as the last quarterback to lead Oklahoma to a national championship and beat Oklahoma with the Tennessee Volunteers, to say nothing of what Joe Milton may or may not do in 2023. Will remain to be seen whether or not he'll be around in 2024, but I doubt it, right? Because that dude has first-round draft pick written all over him, because all you got to do is look at him, watch him work out, and say, okay, we'll fix the rest of it. But there's also a lot to go in here because Josh Heupel and Brent Venables are pals, right? One was defensive coordinator, one was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, right? One of those guys helped raise the other guy. Brent Venables was an assistant coach helping to coach and recruit one Josh Heupel to Oklahoma in Norman. And they have, I think, a lot of really good history to go on. Now, I'm excited about that game because I think it's going to feature two five-star quarterbacks, right, in Jackson Arnold and Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee. But I'm also excited about it because it is the marquee matchup, I think, for Oklahoma this season, or in 2024, in as far as what they get in Norman. Now, number one on the list, I'm already out of order here. I had OU Texas at 1. I had Oklahoma Tennessee at 2. At number 3, I got Oklahoma and Alabama. Okay. Now, I can back this one up by saying it ain't always gone well when Oklahoma plays Alabama, even as Oklahoma still has a winning record against Alabama. Since Nick Saban has taken over the program, yeah, okay, Oklahoma won the Sugar Bowl, and I gloated about it, thought it was a harbinger of things to come, the thing I was talking about with Josh Heupel having won that game. And then the Orange Bowl happened in 2018 with the best quarterback that Oklahoma's ever had in Kyler Murray, who went for 300 passing, went for 100 rushing, and still came out bloodied and dirty because the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line could not keep him safe from Quentin Williams destroying him. I might also add, this is a game in which Tulsa's own Josh Jacobs ran over Peterbilt, won Robert Barnes in this game, basically saying this is who Alabama is, this is who Oklahoma is. We also got the infamous Josh Jacobs being asked, hey, would you like to get some oxygen? And him looking up like, man, I don't need no oxygen. It's Oklahoma over there. That's how they feel about us. Now, getting them into Norman may change some things, but I doubt it. Now, the thing that I have learned most about Nick Saban and Alabama is it doesn't matter who's on the roster for Nick Saban at Alabama. They're going to be competitive. They get to say we had a down year in a year where they won 11 games and beat the Big 12 champion Kansas State Wildcats like they stole something in the Sugar Bowl. Now, on top of all of that, you don't have a whole bunch to go on if you're an Oklahoma fan in 2024, except that you get to say you play in the SEC, and that means now you're getting into the SEC part of the schedule for me. And number 4 in my rankings of this schedule, you got Oklahoma traveling to Tiger Stadium in what is the Southeastern Conference's Death Valley, because the real Death Valley is still in Clemson. Fight me. Oklahoma owes LSU a whooping for a little game in Atlanta in 2019 that nobody watched, and I assure you nobody cared about. There was not much going on that day, but you might have checked the box score in your local paper and saw that it was 63-28. You might have also noticed that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who has the most Bayou name of all Bayou name tailbacks to ever go to LSU, might have been one of the greatest teams of all time. I don't know. You weren't paying attention. I wasn't paying attention. Who could tell? I can't remember. I only know that was in Atlanta, and now Oklahoma has to travel to Baton Rouge to play an LSU team that is coached by Brian Kelly that feels like the kind of team that is like every Brian Kelly team basically since he took over Notre Dame, just a win or two away from playing in the national championship. I mean, quiet as it is kept, they are the defending SEC West champs, which means they beat the Alabama team that I'm not excited about seeing come to Oklahoma to play in 2024, except to say maybe going into that game, you feel some kind of way and you are able to get one back, but we'll see how that goes. I mean, playing down in Tiger Stadium in that swamp, it's tough go. And then, my goodness, you're at Auburn, right? That's also on Oklahoma's schedule. Now, they played this game just twice, and both of those were Sugar Bowls, 1971 and 2016. The Sooners are 2-0. But I think Auburn has an ace in the hole that we just don't talk enough about because, well, the last place you saw him was Tulsa. Philip Montgomery is the offensive coordinator at Auburn for Hugh Freeze. Why is this important? Not because of what Philip Montgomery was able to do at Tulsa, although I would say if you look around, you got a Bednarik Award winner and a first-round pick at outside linebacker, and then you have a first-round pick on your offensive line, Tyler Smith. You're doing pretty damn good, right? But for what Philip Montgomery did at Baylor, you'll remember when Art Browse's Baylor offense was humming, it's Philip Montgomery who was calling the plays. That is what Hugh Freeze hired. He hired the guy that was leading an offense that put up 600-700 yards on people like it was nothing. That had Corey Coleman back there. That had, my goodness, we keep going down the list. Bryce Petty was back there. Shock Linwood was back there. They had dudes, and I think you're going to be able to get that caliber guy at Auburn, because if you get that caliber guy, not be too unkind about it, but at Baylor, you can certainly do that at Auburn. And I think if you take a look at what they have coming in, you can feel good about Auburn going into that game in 2024. Next on the list for me is Oklahoma at Ole Miss. Now, is Faulkner taking snaps? Is John Grisham? No. Then I think this is going to be a game for which you and I might get up for, because being at Ole Miss is one thing, right? I like going to Oxford because I like taking a look around. I like being able to yell hotty toddy at the Grove. But this is a game that I think Oklahoma should feel good about, even as Lane Kiffin is taking in, I kid you not, a quarterback who reclassified after his freshman year at high school to join the program this season. That means that they got perhaps 4 guys that could start football games at Ole Miss over the next 2 years. And one of them is Spencer Sanders. One of them is Walker Howard. One of them is Jackson Dart. You keep going down the list here. You can feel good about that before we get to Quinshon Judkins, who is going to be going into his draft eligible year in 2024. And that's going to be a loaded tailback. Now, Oklahoma versus South Carolina, like when y'all said that OU was playing USC next year, I thought y'all meant something different. I mean, I know Javion, our social maven here, is the South Carolina fan and alumnus, but I mean, that game looks to me a lot like Rutgers at USC. I didn't ask for this, but it is on the schedule. Kind of like A&M having to play South Carolina for all those years. Who asked for this? It doesn't make that much sense. However, Shane Beamer being the head coach at South Carolina is important, because Shane Beamer was offensive assistant at Oklahoma before taking that job. Spencer Rattler will likely be gone by the time they get to play this game, but you get the Oklahoma ties here and you can make this work if you got to write an advance for it in the paper. And as far as trying to sell it to a bunch of people that don't want to watch it, you're selling it mostly to Gamecock and Oklahoma fans when you want to be selling a national game. Now, the last one here, Oklahoma at Missouri. Again, who asked for this? I'm sure it was Missouri that asked for this, right? Because Oklahoma would not. Now, Oklahoma's won 67 or 96 meetings between these two schools, which I think is funny. And that's including all the ties. I think there are 5 ties in that series. But basically what I'm saying here is Oklahoma and Texas A&M was right there. And the SEC said, OU, here's Missouri, South Carolina, and Ole Miss. The problem with this is OU could run this week's schedule. Like if you get past Alabama, you get past Tennessee, you ought to feel good about playing the SEC championship. That also means that it may be the most SEC thing they've ever done, which is put together a so-so regular season schedule, put together some really bad non-conference games and maybe one middling non-conference game, and you end up in the SEC championship game. But it has worked for SEC teams, and now that Oklahoma gets to claim it's an SEC team, maybe it'll work for them too. I think, however, when you look at Texas' schedule, you're going to feel a little bit better if you're a Longhorn fan about this, and you're going to get in your feelings like me if you're an Oklahoma fan about this, because at the top for them, I got OU, Texas, and Dallas, because it's OU, Texas. They've been playing that game since 1900. The last time the Longhorns were this good, I think from a roster standpoint, was actually last year. So if they continue to get better and you get the first coming of Arch Manning, feel good about that too. Jackson Arnold playing in that game, you feel good about that. It's a neutral site game, but that's also the reason why Texas has 4 home games and Oklahoma just has 3. So when this game is going to be played, Oklahoma is designated as the home team, which is why you only get 3 home games there. But I mean, we're also talking about Quinn Ewers is in year 3. I doubt that he makes it to year 4 if he plays well this season. And they still got guys. I mean, recruiting against Texas is always going to be a problem if you are recruiting in the state of Texas, because Texas is always going to get what they want. But for them, they ought to sell out every game that they have, no matter who that is that they're playing, because the schedule breaks that well. Number 2 on the list for me, Texas versus Texas A&M might be the best TV game that we get all of 2024, because they have not played that game since 2011. And that game used to be one of the biggest rivalry games on the calendar, ranking up there with Ohio State, Michigan, right? With USC, UCLA, with Auburn, Alabama. It's important, right? And when they decided not to play it anymore, it hurt all of our feelings because, well, I'm an Oklahoma fan, so I ain't got no sides in it. I like watching them beat up on whomever it is, A&M or Texas. But that's real bragging rights in the state of Texas for people that went to school in the state of Texas. Like, you pick a side even if you didn't go to A&M and you didn't go to UT. If you went to Houston, you got a side here. Now, I also think it's interesting in that this is going to be the 119th time that these two teams have played, even with this stretch of more than a decade of not playing each other. And to put in perspective how long ago it was when Texas and Texas A&M last played, Justin Tucker kicked the game-winning field goal to beat A&M at College Station the last time they played this game. And Justin Tucker has kicked the longest field goal in NFL history since then, right? Alabama also gets Texas in Tuscaloosa, as well as Georgia this season, which I thought was interesting. So they got Alabama's got Texas and Georgia in the same year. I think that along with Oklahoma. Goodness me. Alabama, maybe Nick Saban shouldn't have said what he thought the schedule was going to be. Because now that he's got the schedule that, well, everybody wants to see Alabama play, frankly. Number 3 on the list for me in this Texas 2024 schedule, Texas versus Georgia is an easy one. It's on the 40 acres. Seems like forever ago when Sam Ehlinger told a stadium full of folks in New Orleans, we're back following a win in the Sugar Bowl against UGA. But it turns out that, he was a little bit too far over that Bronco at the rodeo, because since then, Texas has gone 7-3, got their head coach fired, hired the new head coach, went 5-7, and then watched a small private school in Fort Worth playing the national title game in the college football playoff era before they did. This also feels like the schedule that Steve Sarkisian is hoping to get to, right? Because if you do well enough in the Big 12, you'll get an opportunity to really show what you're made of as the head coach of Texas in what should be your best year as head coach at the University of Texas. Now, Texas is 4-1 against Georgia, which is a fact that is probably catching you off guard, like it's catching me off guard. Texas was great against almost everybody, though, in the Dana Bible and the Darrell Royal eras, and that's why they look to have such a dominant record against almost everybody that they play, okay? So number 4 here, going from there from Georgia to Arkansas, which is a game that I really was excited to see back on the schedule. I don't know that Arkansas hates Texas the way that Arkansas hates Texas A&M, but I can tell you they don't feel good about it. And the same is true of Texas. They don't like having to go up just a little bit further north into what is actually the country to go play a football game, but I'm excited about that one anyway. Texas versus Florida is going to be a lot of fun. Texas versus Kentucky is probably going to be okay. That game has only been played once, 1951, and the Longhorns won that one 7-6 in Austin. Number 7, my goodness, Texas versus Mississippi State just feels awkward. And then Texas at Vanderbilt feels like I'm never going to be on board with Texas getting to play Vanderbilt. I understand it's the SEC opponent. I understand that you're going to play all 15 of your SEC opponents. But when I looked at this schedule and I saw that Texas is playing Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Florida, I wondered out loud, did they get to pick this schedule? Did they get to put this together? I know they didn't, but that's how it feels when I see you get to play at Vanderbilt. You should have to play that game at home, at least with this schedule in 2024, because then it feels like maybe somebody else was thinking about how we might see Texas getting to go to Vanderbilt while hosting Georgia. And it's all over the map here. But I think that this is going to work out really well for Oklahoma and Texas, given what the landscape of college football has looked like, given what the SEC has meant to the sport basically since 2004 when Auburn went undefeated. And we're going to get the 2 best teams, I think, from the Big Ten, the 2 best teams from the SEC, regardless of whatever playoff structure we have. And now that we're in 12 teams, probably looking at 3 to 4 from each one of these conferences because they're still going to do this for the most part on who they think looks good. And you'll know that that's a thing that Nick Saban cares very much about. My team looks better than their team. It doesn't matter that we have fewer losses or they have more losses than we have more losses than they do. It matters that we look better. That's the one place where I kind of get into my feelings about this stuff because I tend to believe that the scoreboard matters. I tend to believe that if you win more than the other teams do, that you have earned the right to play for the national championship. However, that's not what moves the sport. What moves the sport is the number of people watching. And there will be more people watching a 3-loss Alabama team than there would be an undefeated Cincinnati, right? And now that they have put the undefeated Cincinnati into the game against the maybe not as great Alabama team into the game, and Alabama stomped a mud hole in them and walked it dry, nobody wants to see that happen again. Everybody wants to see a competitive game in the college football playoff. Everybody wants to see the home atmospheres be 85 to 110,000 deep. Everybody wants to have their best television experience and the biggest audience for each one of these games that they can have. And I understand that, and I'll get out of the way of it. But I am just going to say, once again, that when we're looking at the scoreboard, let's give credit to the folks that win football games while trying not to take credit away from the folks that played a tougher schedule, especially now that you're not going to get penalized as much for it for playing a tough schedule. Thank you for watching the #1 college football show. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and like this video so that you don't miss any of the best college football coverage in America.